Well, good morning, everybody. It's Friday morning, and a very, very warm welcome to you from Penn Vicarage. I hope you're having a lovely week, and thank you for joining us for our Bible reflection for today. Friends, we have been going through Joshua, and we've got done to all chapters so far, and we get to chapter 13, and at this point, I can safely say, Houston, we have a problem. I'll read you the first few verses, and you'll see why. Now Joshua was old and advanced in years, and the Lord said to him, "You are old and advanced in years, and very much of the land still remains to be possessed. This is the land that still remains, all the regions of the Philistines and all those of the Geshurites from the Shinar, which is east of Egypt, northward to the boundary of Ekron, it is reckoned as Canaanite. There are 5 rulers of the Philistines, those of Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron, and those of Avim and the south, and all the land of Canaanites, and Mirah that belongs to Sidonians, and to Aphek to the boundary of Amorites, and the land of the Gebalites, and all Lebanon towards the east, from Baal Gad, from below the Mount Hermon to Lebo Hamath, and all the inhabitants of the hill country, from Lebanon to Mishrethoph Maim, and all the Sidonites. I myself will drive them out from before the Israelites. Only allot the land to Israel for an inheritance, as I have commanded you. Now therefore divide this land for inheritance to the 9 tribes and the half-tribe of Manasseh. With the other half-tribe of Manasseh, the Reubenites and the Gadites received their inheritance, which Moses gave them, beyond the Jordan eastward, as Moses the servant of the Lord gave them, from Aroer on the edge of the Wadi Arnon, and the town that is in the middle of the city, and all the tableland from Medeba as far as Dibon, and all the cities of King Sihon and the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon as far as the boundary of the Ammonites, and Gilead, and the region of Geshurun, and the Maccathites, and so on. Right, this is the I say the problem, because what happens now essentially is for the next from chapter 13 all the way to chapter 21 is almost entirely a list of places and names, and I don't intend to read it out to you. What happens essentially here, by the way, this is the word of the Lord, and thanks be to God. Right, what we're going to do is I'm just going to, you can feel free to read these at your leisure, but I'm just going to give you a few sort of highlights rather than listing out, because I think otherwise people are going to get lose heart very quickly. What we have essentially in the next few chapters is laid out to Joshua all the places where the people of God are going to reside in the promised land. They've got there, and in a sense, what happens now is it's the portioning out of a bit like the land registry or something like that, all the places where they are to be. So all the different tribes are all given their particular allotment within the promised land. Okay, and as I say, from chapter 13 all the way to chapter 21, it's a whole list of places and names and places allocation to certain tribes. Right, so a few thoughts about this. Firstly, I'm not going to read them out to you this morning, and I don't intend to. I'm going to go straight to chapter 21. I would encourage you, if you have the patience, to read through them. It is something very satisfactory at the end to be able to say that you've genuinely read the whole Bible, and there is something to be said for that. I did it a few years ago, shortly after having become a Christian. So do fight your way through it if you've got the patience. Just read through them, and because it is lovely to be able to say at the end when you finally do it, you can safely say, I've read the whole Bible. There is something rather lovely at that. So every time you hear something read in church, you can safely say, I've heard it before. And also, I do hear that the Lord works in mysterious ways. And I did hear a story once about somebody who actually became a Christian through reading the genealogies in the Book of Chronicles. So anyway, at your leisure, when you get a few minutes, have a fight your way through. Just read through the next few chapters. But I don't intend to read it to you here this morning. So for chapter 13 to chapter 21, essentially is having, is all the allocation for the various tribes to the various parts of the promised land. Okay. So what can we say apart from I would encourage you to read the whole thing and let the Lord work in his word in his own way. Firstly, apart from that, secondly, you could argue that the distribution is a sign of God's faithfulness. That God is doing this and God has done this, and in a sense, one could argue from the people of God's point of view that the fact that they are having land allocated to them is a sign of, look at what God has done. God has achieved this, God has won the victory, he is king, we are in the land, and in a sense, the sign that they've all got a bit, one could argue, is a sign for them of God's faithfulness. Next, there are some little highlights in there as well. in chapter 14, verses 10 to 13, you hear the mention of a man called Caleb. Now, just in case you didn't know, in the book of Numbers, when they were considering entering the promised land, Moses sent out 2 spies into the promised land to sort of suss out the land. I think there were 30 of them, and 28 of them came back with, "Oh, it's terrible, and the people there are very big." Joshua and Caleb were the 2 that came back and essentially said, "Look, it's all right, and in God's power we can do this." And so Joshua and Caleb both showed extraordinary acts of faith. And even now, this has clearly not been forgotten. So in chapter 14, I shall read this to you, the first few verses here. Chapter 14, 10 to 13, it says, and because it's Caleb's words, "And now, as you see, the Lord has kept me alive. And he said, these 45 years since the time the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel was journeying through the wilderness. And here I am today, 85 years old, and still as strong now as I was when the day when Moses sent me. My strength now is my strength then for war and for going and coming. So now give me this hill country for which the Lord spoke on that day, which you heard on that day, how the Anakim were there with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out, as the Lord said." Then Joshua blessed him and gave Hebron to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and so on. So the point being that Joshua and Caleb both showed extraordinary faith before they entered the promised land. Those 45 years ago. Caleb has clearly kept the faith, and being given Hebron is the reward to him and to his family. So Joshua and Caleb were both great men of faith who showed great faith before they entered the promised land, and that faith has not been forgotten about. So that's been highlighted there. In chapter 14, 10 to 13, you hear Caleb's reward for his faith. Next thing to say, at the beginning of chapter 13, you have Joshua going old. It's quite interesting. Now, Joshua was old and advanced in years, and the Lord said to him, "You are old and advanced in years, and very much of the land still remains to be possessed," and so on. And I think what's interesting there is the reflection on old age, whereas Caleb, as I've just described, clearly felt that even though he's in his 80s, he still feels strong and full of God. Joshua was obviously, old age was obviously starting to get the better of him, and he wasn't as strong and fit as he had been, and he couldn't do what he used to be able to do. And yet he's still faithful, and he still has wonderful things to do. And likewise, Moses, who Joshua is like, Moses remains strong and fit right to the end of the day of his death. And I think what this tells us is reflection on old age, is that elderly people and people with lots of wisdom can do incredible things for God. And that actually some of the most useful people often in church life are people who are retired or recently retired, because they've got wonderful wisdom. And listening to sort of elderly priests and so on who've been around a lot, and elderly Christians and people who've been Christians a long time, they've got their wisdom, they've got so much to give too. So here you have Joshua and Caleb both being elderly, but still being full of faith. One able to still maintain active ministry in Caleb's case. In Joshua's case, how he learned to hand over some things to people because he had faith, but his body wasn't as fit as it once was. So here's a reflection here on old age, but the importance of wisdom, and that people, however old we may be, have still got fantastic things we can do for God. So that's another one. Another highlight is chapter 13, 6 to 7, where they allocate land that hasn't actually been conquered yet. So what they're saying is this is such an act of faith. They knew what God was doing. They knew God. They were so confident that God had given them the land that they allocate land, even though it hasn't actually been conquered at this stage. So it's a tremendous act of faith too. And finally, in chapter 20, just look at it at your leisure, you have an unusual section about places of refuge, where certain cities are allowed, and it becomes like places of sanctuary, where if you've killed somebody by mistake or whatever, you can run away and you can flee from. So in a sense, rather than having a mob running after you, can claim you can claim safety until it gets properly sorted out. And I think one of the great things about the law of God and what Joshua brought with him was the importance of some kind of proper legal system. That justice was not summary, justice was done in a proper way. That actually accidents do happen and things do go wrong sometimes, and that proper justice, measured justice, can take place rather than mob justice. And I think that's so important for us to learn today. And our legal system needs to reflect that. You know, what is proper justice and doing things properly and in a measured way, rather than what just feels Yahoo at the time. So here you have chapters 13 to 20, 21. And as I say, I don't intend to read it all out to you because I think I'd lose my viewing figures very, very quickly if I was to do so. Just a few points from this, which I hope you find helpful. Firstly, do read them read them at your leisure, because it is good to be able to say that you've read the whole Bible, and also that people do sometimes become Christians because God works in remarkable ways. Secondly, just the distribution of land can be seen as an act of demonstration of God's faithfulness. God said he was going to do it, and he did it, and it's a demonstration of God's faithfulness. Thirdly, you have God's faithfulness to Caleb. Caleb has shown tremendous faith before, and he still remain faithful 45 years later, and he gets his reward in chapter 14. Then you've got the importance of old age, and the wisdom, and Joshua and Caleb had remained faithful for many, many years, and that God honoured that, and the elderly people have a tremendous amount to give to the Church of Jesus Christ today. And Joshua and Caleb still continue to do that, and had remained faithful to God for over 40 years and more. Then you've got, and finally, you've got the places of refuge at the end in chapter 20, where there's a place where people could flee for proper justice, and the importance of having proper justice in Christian countries, about things not being done summarily, but things being done properly, and there always being a chance for someone to run away and get proper justice, and the God's law always brings that about. Friends, lots to think about there. Read the chapters at your leisure. Have a lovely day. Have a lovely weekend. You've got 3 days to read them before Monday. Have a lovely day. God bless you. Thank you for watching. I hope that's been helpful, and